e to the power of pi times I plus 1 equals 0. And it is such a coincidence that they work together that way. And yes,
No! We made up the numbers! What do you mean that's a coincidence they work together this way? We made up the numbers! So recently, I did a react to one of Redeemed Zoomer's videos. If you don't know who Redeemed Zoomer is, he's basically this guy on YouTube who's like a Christian fundamentalist, best known for making a video called All Atheist Arguments Answered in 10 Minutes. And if you haven't seen it, here's kind of the idea. You got the Soy Jack atheist over here and the Giga Chad Christian right here. And then he asks a bunch of questions that may or may not actually be asked by atheists to Christians, and then answers all of them. And as you can see, it's mostly downvoted. So not a great response. And he himself has acknowledged since then that it was not his best video. He says that he made it as a joke. I don't know to what extent he's being serious. I don't think that he's lying, per se. But I do think that, you know, he did try to make some salient arguments in here, and they just didn't, they're not very well thought out, I don't think. But he made a response to criticism of the video, and I asked in my last video, if anybody has that, let me know. So here it is. Here's his response to that video, and I didn't know this existed. Let's go over it. He's going to respond to criticism and then make a tier list of all arguments in favor of God. Let's take a look.
Hey guys, I'm Redeemed Zoomer. So about a month ago, I put out this video, All Atheist Arguments Debunked in 10 Minutes, and it got way more attention than I thought it would.
I'm glad he's in the bottom
Tons
right.
and tons of very high-profile atheist YouTubers like Matt Dillahunty and Alex O'Connor of Cosmic Skeptic responded
Alec
to
Gunter.
it. Basically, a lot of people saying it was really bad arguments. And they're right. That video was bad. But there's a reason why it's bad. And the reason is not because...
I have a problem. Anytime that I see a picture that could even, like the trash thing right here, like anytime I see something that could even remotely look like it's AI generated, I like scrutinize it. I don't think this is AI generated, but thanks for doing that to me, AI art industry. Jesus Christ.
And they're right. That video
Ruined
was
my
bad.
brain.
But there's a reason why it's bad. And the reason is
Yeah,
not
it is
because
always a
there
joke when it
aren't
falls
good
flat.
Christian responses to atheist arguments. If you go to Inspiring Philosophy's YouTube channel, you'll find great responses, much better than the ones I did. But my channel is not like his channel. What my channel is famous for is making very short, oversimplified explanations of religious things, like all Christian denominations explained in 10 minutes, or every book of the Bible explained in 15 minutes. And that sort of spawned a new style.
I'll be real. If he does that well, that might be good content. Like, I'd be fine with, you know, with him doing stuff like that if it's done well and in a neutral capacity. Like explaining all the major stories of the Bible or whatever. I think that's totally fine. My problem is he'll tell you then, you should believe in this, you should do this and that, etc., etc. And I don't jive with that.
Style of YouTube videos with channels like The Paint Explainer and stuff, which is great, by the way. I think it's cool. The style of very short explanations with Comic Sans and symbols to represent things. Tons and tons of new channels have spawned off of that. Okay. But that's what my channel was for. So I thought, you know, what if I do that, but for atheist arguments? What if I do every Christian response to atheist arguments simplified and summarized in 10 minutes? But my 60 IQ brain didn't realize that an argument needs to be drawn out. An argument needs to consider all the sides and can't just...
Like I said, I can appreciate when somebody knows that a previous video of theirs was not the best. I did that with my shopping cart thing. I did that with, I've done that with a couple of others. I've scrutinized my Jubilee appearance pretty heavily. Like, you know, have some self-reflection. I can respect that.
Just be very hand-wavy
and
shortened and oversimplified. That defeats the whole purpose of an argument. The truth is, you could make an hour-long debate, a 2-hour-long debate for each of those arguments, or at least most of those arguments covered in that video. So what I'm going to give you guys today is a more in-depth version of all the Christian arguments, all the arguments for God, because not every argument in that video was actually an argument that I believed. Just the way a few days ago I made a video about
totally.
arguments for God explained. I don't necessarily use all those arguments for God. I'm just explaining what the arguments are, what the Christian arguments are. So in this video, I'm going to give you guys what I actually think about all the different Christian arguments, all the arguments for God. I'm going to be ranking all the arguments, and I'm going to do a bit...
Okay, but if that was the intention of the video, that was not communicated very well, which, to be fair, he has criticized himself for the video, so I won't dig into him too much on that. I think he knows.
More of an in-depth analysis of them, and I'm going to actually address the common atheist criticisms of them. So a while ago, a different atheist...
Yeah, famous. I mean, he did get, it's like 600,000 views. I would say the video, at least, is famous in atheist circles. But he does, like, say that he's, like, well-known as, like, some kind of, not a philosopher, what does he say, a epistemological studier or something like a... He says that he's famous as, like, somebody who studies religion, and that's not... I think he's a little bit high and mighty on that.
This YouTuber called Genetically Modified Skeptic made a tier list of arguments for God, ranking which ones he thinks are the most convincing and most easy to understand. And I actually thought that was a good idea, so I'm going to steal that idea, and I'm going to make my own tier list of arguments for God. So in F tier, we have Pascal's Wager.
Not gonna lie, one thing I don't understand is why people get attached to the book more than trying to have a relationship with God himself. It's not even an attachment to the book. It's an attachment to the idea of the book. And it's because it's like it's like a very good symbol for them to use. I mean, you put your hand on the Bible still when you swear something in the court of law. Like, that's still a thing we do. You know, that's very antiquated. So it's just a symbol. It's like the cross, right? People aren't looking at the cross and thinking about how they crucified, like every single time, I should say, how they crucified Jesus Christ. Usually you see the cross, you think about Jesus, you think about God, you associate it with different imagery. You know, like, it's a symbol. The Bible is just a symbol to most of these people. If they've actually read it and they agree with it, then they're psychos. Because, like, God is not a good person in it. I'm sorry, I don't care if you're religious. That's just the bottom line. God's not a good person if you read the Bible literally word for word. You know, and people like that certainly do exist. But most people just think of the Bible as kind of like a religious symbol. You know what I mean?
Genetically Modified Skeptic also put Pascal's Wager in F tier. I agree.
And yeah, that's another good point. A lot of them don't want a relationship with God. They want moral superiority over someone else. Thank you, Travenoid.
Pascal's Wager basically says, you know, if you believe in God and it turns out God is real, then that's good for you. You'll probably go to heaven.
I agree, by the way.
If you believe in God and God turns out not to be real, nothing happens to you. If you don't believe in God and it turns out God...
I think that pretty much all arguments in favor of God existing go in, like, D tier and lower. Because you really can't... Like, some of them are better than others, but you really can't prove God. You can't prove or disprove God. So I'll bet one of these is going to be you can't disprove God. I don't know where he's going to put that one, but I'm going to guess, like, C tier. But even then, I would put that in, like, E tier at best.
You can substitute other books for swearing in. I do it on either Principia Mathematica from Newton, or on The Origin of Species.
Thank you very much for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs, Saki Tanuki. Appreciate you. Yeah, I'm sorry, but if you're gonna lie, you're gonna lie. Like, there's no amount of... There's really nothing you can do, like, swear in on. You're basically just doing a pinky promise. You just do a pinky promise. You say, okay, trust me, bro, you know? Like, there's no point in it. It's just an antiquated tradition that we still hold.
God's not real.
Thank you again,
nothing happens to you. But if you don't believe in God and it turns out God is real, you might go to hell. So basically the argument is that you have better chances of having a good afterlife if you believe in God, and there's no harm in believing in God, so why not do that? There's tons of problems. First of all, it's not even an argument for the existence of God. It's only an argument for belief in the existence of God. And second of all, it only really works if the only two options are Christian and atheist. But there's a lot of contradictory religions, like there's Christianity and Islam, which both generally say you need to believe in their specific beliefs to have eternal life, basically. So Pascal's Wager doesn't work at all. I don't know of any serious Christians who even like to use Pascal's Wager. I agree that it goes in F tier because it's not an argument at all. Now, E tier does not exist. It is not a real tier. I don't know why it appears on these things. You don't get E on a report card. It's A, B, C, D, and then F, which means fail. And then, of course, on these tier things...
It exists if you're a Sonic fan.
barely made it.
The one that doesn't exist if you're a Sonic fan is F tier, because Sonic was like, you know what, we don't we don't want to make the... I actually respect this a lot. They were like, we don't want to make them feel bad or like remind them of school, so we'll make it E tier instead of F tier. I actually kind of like that.
S means superior, so we're skipping E.
It makes me feel less bad than an F.
I'm actually going to put the cosmological argument. I know that certain atheists actually think the cosmological argument is one of the better arguments for God. I don't know. I've just never really liked it. I feel like the cosmological argument relies too much on our intuitions about how the world works. For example, like everything that is in motion needs to be moved by something, so you need a first unmoved mover. It's the uncaused causer argument. Yeah, I don't like that one either. I think it's stupid. The uncaused causer, like, it only makes as much sense as any uncaused causer. Like, it could be a flying spaghetti monster that caused everything, you know, like that old argument. I just don't buy it. I do think the best person to articulate this is, of course, St. Thomas Aquinas. Not just in the Summa Theologica, but Summa Contra Gentiles. That's the one book of Thomas Aquinas that I've read fully. Is the first book of Summa Contra Gentiles. He does make a very compelling argument for God. He uses the cosmological argument, arguing for an unmoved mover, and then going from unmoved mover to then show how the all the attributes of God, like all-powerful, all-knowing, naturally flow from being an unmoved mover. So I think that argument, Thomas Aquinas' cosmological argument, works perfectly if you already presuppose...
Good point, Ivory Inferno. S is also not used in the American grading system. So...
Aristotelian
F
metaphysics.
to all of them.
Because Thomas Aquinas was really just copying that argument from Aristotle, basically, and making it a bit more Christian. So Aristotelian metaphysics, the system developed by Aristotle, it's kind of a vindication of common sense in some ways.
Is S tier on there? Yeah, sorry. Here. Should I move over here for right now? Is that better? I'll keep it here for now.
It's a metaphysics that is very in line with human common sense about how things work, and it is very in line with the physics of the day. It makes perfect sense in the physics of back then to say that everything that is in motion has something moving it and stuff. But modern quantum physics seems to call some of that into question. Because in modern quantum physics, I mean, I don't pretend to really understand quantum physics, but I know enough to know that quantum physics really undermines all of our common sense assumptions about how objects work and move and stuff. Like a particle could be in multiple places simultaneously. That undermines the classical understanding of what a physical body of something is. So my problem with the
I don't think it's that a particle can be in multiple places simultaneously. It's that we can measure it in multiple places at the same time, right? Like, I'm not a physicist, and I'm certainly not like a microphysicist or anything, or an atomic physicist, but it's not that one electron can be in two different places at once. It's that when we measure it, it appears to be in two different places at once, or 50 or 100 or however many. And that's why we have an electron cloud. The Christian dude has it right. Oh, really? Okay, never mind. Like I said, I don't understand that stuff very well.
Cosmological argument.
I got like a 58% in organic chemistry. It was a passing grade somehow, but yeah, that gives you an insight on how much I know about like electron spins and shit. I can explain it better than Zoomer. Please do.
In general, is it tries to argue for God based on material things, and I don't like to do that because our understanding of the material world is constantly changing. So I feel like we build a house of cards if we make an argument for God based on material things. Because something that Alex O'Connor said in my video, like in my answering atheist arguments video, I said science cannot speak to whether or not God exists. And then Alex O'Connor was like, okay, then why does Redeem Zoomer in this video use the cosmological argument? And my response is I was not using the cosmological argument. I was just listing it as one of the...
I don't know. Honestly, another part that I have respect for him for is being able to sit through all the criticism, because I have a really hard time sitting through criticisms of my videos. So not unironically, I respect him for that.
Arguments some Christians do use. I do not particularly
I'd be whinging
like
and
the
cringing the whole
cosmological
time.
argument. Also in D tier, we have the teleological argument. It's basically the argument from design. So the most common form of this is like intelligent design. Stephen Mayer, who I actually talked to once in person. He just visited a church I was attending. Stephen Mayer is a big advocate of intelligent design and stuff, that, there's a lot of design in nature. There's too much complexity for it to have evolved naturally.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
And I don't like this because Darwinian evolution does explain the complexity in nature. Yes, there are some things that it's hard for Darwinian evolution to explain, but then you're doing a God of the Gaps.
He's pretty on point so far.
I don't want to ever do a God of the Gaps. And I appreciate that Alex O'Connor recognized that I was avoiding the God of the Gaps fallacy. For example, I don't personally understand how Darwinian evolution could explain the development of the eye, for example. It seems like there's too much irreducible complexity.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like, all of the arguments so far get an F for me, but the way he's explaining it is decent. So I'm not going to, like, nitpick on where he's placing them. I don't care.
But just because I don't understand it doesn't mean there is not a science.
Okay, let's talk about the eye for a second, because it turns out the eye is very imperfectly designed. Did you guys know that? Like, the eye has a blind spot. We all know, like, the blind spot, right? It's, like, up here. Like, if you were to... they can test it, too, in, like, a clinical setting. If you stare straight ahead and they blink a dot, like, up here, you won't be able to see it if it's in the right spot. And it's because, I don't remember exactly, but it's because of the way it evolved so that, like, the nerve bundles go over the receptor rather than under. Like, the place that they attach at is, like, over top the receptor or something like that. And so in octopuses, they actually have perfectly, they're not perfect, obviously, but they don't have a blind spot. There are some species that are the same way, but I'm pretty sure octopuses is one where the nerve bundles, like, evolved underneath of it. But I forget exactly, like, I'm explaining this very poorly, but hopefully you guys get the idea. The blind spot, I think, just shoots this idea in the foot.
Scientific explanation. If I say I don't understand this, therefore God, then I'm doing the God of the Gaps
our eyes
fallacy,
are very limited, yeah.
Which is not a good argument.
And there are also animals that can see more colors than us, stuff like that.
If you just argue for God based on things science can't yet explain, then your reasons to believe in God will shrink as science gets more and more advanced, and that's never been the Christian way to do science. Christianity has always been the basis for science, not the gaps that science hasn't filled in yet. So, one form of the teleological argument...
Hold on, what did he just say? Christianity? Hold on.
And that's never been the Christian way to do science. Christianity has always been the basis for science, not the gaps that science hasn't filled in yet. So, one form...
Oh, he's saying that, like, in a Christian worldview, Christianity is the basis for science. I disagree entirely. Like, if you take the Bible literally, which a lot of Christian fundamentalists do, then science just goes out the window. Like, you can't base science off of Christianity. I don't think that's possible.
Form of the teleological argument is sort of an intelligent design with biological things. There's another form of the teleological argument, which is the fine-tuning argument. And genetically modified skeptic actually considered this the best argument for God. Even though he's an atheist, I don't consider this a good argument. The fine-tuning argument basically says there's like 4 fundamental constants in our universe, and if they were like a trillionth
yes,
of
it would be a very flawed way of doing
a degree
science.
Different, our whole universe would collapse in on itself. For example, if gravity was
I don't think that's
one
true.
hair stronger, if the gravitational constant was 1 hair stronger, our entire universe would collapse on itself, and there would be no life or stars or planets. It would all just, the Big Bang would recollapse into one singularity because gravity would pull everything together. But if gravity was 1 hair weaker, then there also wouldn't be any life or stars or planets because everything would just spread out too thin. It wouldn't be able to condense. I might be getting the science of that a bit off. That's just what I've heard.
Yeah, that sounds really silly to me. I don't know if there's any credence to that at all. Let me look something up. Maybe there is. If gravity were stronger, if gravitational constant were stronger. If suddenly the value of g, the gravitational constant, increased to 1 billion times its actual value, what? Locally on Earth would suddenly feel a sudden increase in weight, making it extremely difficult for us to move. Well, yeah, but that's if it had been suddenly. Like, obviously, the entire universe would be spread out completely differently if the gravitational constant were, like, a hair different. Like, because that would compound over time, right? And, we don't know what would happen. We would just be shorter. Actual physicists use mostly variables for math and then plug them in later as the actual constants don't matter. Yeah, I don't think it's even remotely true. Like, the universe would be different. It would be different, but it wouldn't be, like, crazy, like we can't even survive different, you know what I mean? Or like life would never evolve different. At least I don't think so. I don't know. If anybody can prove me wrong on that, feel free.
And yes, scientists admit that the universe does seem fine-tuned to support life, but here's the problem.
I disagree.
What Stephen Hawking would say...
If it were fine-tuned to support life, space would not be a thing. Empty space is like 99% of the fucking universe. It's just empty space. It's a vacuum, okay? We think about like space travel, you know, and like being able to like go to Mars, right? You guys understand how far Mars is from Earth? Like how it's insanely far. It is unfathomably far. Okay? And guess what's between there? Nothing. Literally nothing. Like, of course there's going to be like little debris here and there and little meteorites or whatever, but like there's nothing there. And so if there's just a vacuum there, there's no way to support that. So if like 99% of the universe is inhabitable for life, how the hell can you say that it's fine-tuned for life? Earth is fine-tuned for life because life was fine-tuned for Earth. Okay, this is a chicken and egg problem. And the obvious solution to this is that the Earth came first, life came after. We evolved to live on Earth, not the other way around. Our existence would be much different if not for the fact that we live on Earth. So the fine-tuning thing is answered very easily by evolution, in my opinion.
Is there could be just infinite universes, and if there are infinite
you think we can make a drone that can sustain life on Venus? I highly doubt it. Venus is not the place you want to go. Mars would be in theory the easiest to terraform because we think that life might have existed on Mars at one point already, but and it has traces that would indicate that it's like very Earth-like, and there might be like frozen water underneath the surface. We don't know yet, but yeah, it's terraforming is kind of it's possible in theory only. And by theory, I mean you maybe possibly could do it one day in the way far off future. But we can't even keep our own planet in check. What the hell are people talking about terraforming Mars and Venus and shit? Like, are you kidding me? You can't even take care of the home planet that you were born on. You dense what are you talking about terraforming? Not you. I'm not trying to be mean to the person who said that. But like that's my argument is like really think about this for a second. Can a drone last on the surface? I don't know, actually. I'm sure that one day we'll be able to make a drone that could, like, feasibly, quote-unquote, survive on Venus. Sorry. Venus is an amazing if we don't stop climate change version of Earth. Yeah, good point.
Universes, then obviously some of them are going
start
to
by
have the
terraforming
conditions
Earth.
to support life. It's kind of like Earth has the conditions to support life, but there are billions and billions and billions of planets, so some of them are probably going to have the conditions to support life. So I'm not sure if I believe in the multiverse. They haven't proven nor disproven that. I personally don't. But there's no reason that is very much a possibility. So you don't want to say there is something we don't understand, therefore God, if there is a very reasonable, naturalistic possibility. And like I said, the teleological argument, just like the cosmological argument, is a form of arguing for God based on earthly or physical created realities, which I don't think we should do. All right, now, C tier, we have evidentialism. So evidentialism is very convincing to the average person. I've seen far more people convinced of Christianity by studying the evidence for the resurrection of Christ than have been convinced based on some, I don't know, philosophical, cosmological, or ontological argument. So the evidential perspective is very convincing to people, but I just don't think it's a good argument because I don't think someone's salvation should depend on their ability to like do historical analysis and find evidence for.
Oh, so it's basically just there's evidence for God's existence. There's really no evidence at all. Anything that we find historically can be explained by science. Like it can all be explained. And if it can't be, let's say that we find something that we simply can't explain scientifically, right? We'll eventually find a way to explain it. Like you can't just fill in God. You know what I mean? There's plenty of things that we can't currently explain scientifically that people try to say, oh, well, it's just God doing it. You know? And that's not a scientific way of measuring what is actually causing like things like consciousness, or if we were to discover something that by all scientific means should not be there. Known scientific means, I should say. You guys get my point? Like, it's God of the gaps, basically. God of the gaps. You know what's amazing at convincing people to believe in Christianity? Indoctrination for youth at young ages. True. I was saying the problem here is he's not accounting for any other religion. He did account for it in Pascal's wager.
There's also evidence of modern things like demonic possessions and near-death experiences.
No, there's not. That's such bullshit. Demonic possessions and near-death experiences can both be explained scientifically. Demonic possession is usually something like schizophrenia or some other kind of mental illness or some kind of episode that people have, like seizures. People used to think that seizures are demonic possessions. Like, come on, we can't fully explain seizures yet, but we know that there's something going on in the brain that you can take medications for, or like cut the corpus callosum and stop the seizure disorder. Like, they can be explained through physical, tangible means. We just don't always have the way to explain it yet because the brain's very complicated, evolutionarily speaking. As for near-death experiences, your brain floods itself with chemicals, basically like feel-good chemicals, right before you die. And so that's why people get the experience, like a euphoric experience of heaven, or seeing all your loved ones, or revisiting good times that you had in the past, you know, stuff like that. Not every near-death experience is the same, and people who claim that are being stupid. This is why you shouldn't rely on your senses all the time. If evidential gets an F from me. They all get an F. They're all stupid. My friend almost died in a car crash, and that's how his belief started, unless near-death experience is something else. No, that's exactly what it is. And it's fine if you believe it. It's fine. If you really believe that you had a near-death experience and you saw God, like, that's fine, I guess, but I just don't believe you. Like, I don't think that you actually saw God. You know? If you believe that, I'm not going to take that from you. But I don't believe it.
And, you know, if you talk to any Caribbean person, any person from the Caribbean will tell you that demons are real. It's a very Western Eurocentric thing to say that the supernatural never really happens. In other parts of the world, it happens so much.
Can they prove it? Do they have evidence of demons? Do they have like goat horns that like can't be found genetically on any animal on Earth? Do they have like satanic rituals that they do to summon them? Like, what is it? You know? And also, like, I don't entirely think that like anybody that's true of like anybody from the Caribbean. Yeah, it's very racist. It's very noble savage type shit, right? Like, I don't like this argument at all.
Much that the average person would be silly to deny it. And it makes sense. Like, if demons are real, it would make sense for them to do that. Here's why. The biggest problem...
Yeah, if demons are real, it would make sense for people to believe that demons are real. That's true. Good point, man. Very good point.
The biggest threat to Christianity in the West is atheism, basically.
Yeah, because what ends up... it's the biggest threat to any religion, because guess what ends up happening? If you start off from any point of religion, including atheism, which if you count it as a religion, right? If you start off from there, the most likely outcome is that you're either going to remain that same religion or become an atheist. You're not going to convert to any other religion usually. I mean, it happens, but atheism is a very natural endpoint when you start to think about these things rationally. You know what I mean? There are a lot of people also who go non-Abrahamic, like, you know, what some people would call pagans. There are people in my chat who don't like that, so I try not to use it. You know, stuff like that. But typically the biggest net, I guess, for people who kind of go away from Christianity is atheism. So that's true.
Secular atheism is a big threat to the West.
Yeah, where's
so
the
if
evidence?
Demons started manifesting themselves
A big
powerfully
threat to the West,
in the West, everyone would run to church, which is not what the demons want, because...
No, I wouldn't. Are you kidding me? I'd run to the nearest gun store. What? If I saw demons, my first thought is not, oh my God. Like, unless they're literally saying, we're here for the non-believers. You know what I mean? If they're saying, we're here for the non-believers, I mean, yeah, if church is like the one way to save my fucking life and that of the people that I care about, then yeah, I'll run to church. But I don't think that's a good like, if God literally sends demons for the non-believers, I feel like that's a very shit God. And eventually I would declare war on him. Guns can spot demons, can stop demons. I don't know. Guess what? Demons aren't real. It worked in what's the game called? Not Helldiver. It's Helldivers is different. What's the game called where you go to Doom? It worked in Doom. That guy uses guns on demons. So, you know, you don't know until you try. Everyone's sitting there praying for the demons to go away. Y'all ever tried blasting them? So anyway, I start blasting. you know?
Because, the West is a historically Christian land. By the way, if atheists are, I already can hear the
Exactly,
atheists typing in all caps in the comments section. I'm just saying, from a Christian perspective, it would make sense that demons would manifest themselves more in non-historically Christian lands than historically Christian lands. I think you...
Yes. The heathens, you see, have all the demons that manifest there. Has anybody ever actually captured one on video? You know, like they'll say, oh, look, this person's possessed by a demon. And then it's like a person having a seizure. And then they f***ing die because they don't get health care because everybody's around them's convinced that they're possessed by a demon and trying to like throw holy water and salt on them. You know, like that's how that usually ends up going down.
You can at least agree with that if you assume Christianity is true, which I know you don't. I'm just saying...
The demon got him.
That does explain to me, as a Christian, why people of other...
What happened? Oh, I don't know. He just started shaking and then collapsed on the floor and kept shaking. So we turned him on his back and, then he threw up and choked on it. And the demon just got him. You know, what can I say? The demon got him. We tried throwing salt water on him and it didn't work.
Cultures like the Caribbean where there's like voodoo and stuff, why they have much more personal experiences of the demonic than in the West. So evidentialism, it can work. And there's also evidence of some other things, like some people try to look for evidence of like Noah's flood or whatever. I don't know. I'm not that into that stuff because, like I said, someone's salvation shouldn't depend on their ability to dig through historical documents. That's also kind of why I'm not convinced by the arguments for Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy being the one true church, by the way, because they both have like equally convincing historical arguments. So at the end of the day, from their perspective, someone's...
I mentioned this in my last video that I'm about to release. I think tomorrow probably. I don't mind your religion nearly as much if like what I used to believe, which is like if you live your life decently, and you do your best not to hurt other people, you go to heaven. And there's no such thing as hell. There's purgatory. Like you sit in purgatory, think about what you've done, you repent, and then you go to heaven. I think that's fine, because you don't want heaven full of a bunch of criminals. Like violent criminals. So like you sit in purgatory, you get rehabilitated, and then you go to heaven. I think that's a fine belief system to have. But that's not what people like Redeemed Zoomer believe. He believes in hell, and he believes that people who don't believe without evidence go to hell. And I don't like that.
Salvation depends on their ability to privately judge which historical arguments have more weight. The next one is personal experience. Now, this is kind of the biggest reason I believe in God. One of the two. This plus another one I'm going to get to.
Well, this is personal experience is like the lowest level of evidence you can possibly have. F tier, dog shit.
Two is the biggest reason I believe in God. Like, I've personally experienced things that are unexplainable without God.
I'd love to hear some of them.
But that's not going to convince anyone else. Personal experience is very good for convincing oneself that God exists, but very bad for convincing...
My dad tries to use this one on me, and I won't get into the specifics because I love my dad, and he, I don't want to... I really don't want to rail against him, man, but he really does try with his personal experience bullshit, and I'm just like, Dad, I'm sorry, like, I just wasn't there. And also, even if this did happen to you, that doesn't explain, like, why there's still suffering in the world. If you have an all-powerful, all-loving God, once again, that, I've said this several times, that loves everybody and is all-powerful, why do people suffer? Why does suffering exist? It doesn't make any sense. These are arguments for God, yes.
Convincing anyone else, because it's personal. No one can step into the shoes of someone else's personal experience. So I would say it's C tier. I'm surprised genetically modified...
But if you have, like, if you see something or hear something that nobody else can see or hear and you attribute it to God, I'm contributing it to a trick of your mind, okay? It's still your experience. When you talk, okay, let's take schizophrenia, for example. When you take somebody who has like schizophrenic disorder or schizoaffective disorder or whatever, they usually have what's called hallucinations, which can be tactile hallucinations, like the feeling of bugs crawling on your skin, for instance, is a common one. You can have visual hallucinations. I had one guy once tell me that he thought he saw like a knight in armor in the hallway. And the key here is that person saw that. That person saw that. That doesn't mean that it was actually there, but that person saw it and experienced it, And I don't take that away from people. There's a very important distinction here. But what becomes a problem is when you say, no, that objectively happened, Okay? This goes outside of the realm of personal experience. You say, no, that objectively happened. Like, there really was a knight in armor in the hallway who told me that, like, I need to praise and worship God. When nobody else could see or hear it. You know? That's where it comes from. Is your brain, not from God.
Skeptic put it in A tier. Maybe he was doing that. Maybe he was doing that in order to say, like, the best arguments that religious people have are from personal experience, but I don't think that's true. Okay, so now we get into B tier. So
I do want to say, for the record, telling people about your personal experiences, unfortunately, can have a profound impact on them. Personal experiences are very convincing to the average person, especially if you're close to them, I should say. Like, if you have a family member or a friend who claims to have had a personal experience with God, you're much more likely to believe them. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way of the world. I've had personal experiences with hallucinations and mental illness. I want to share these with you. Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah. And it doesn't even have to necessarily be mental illness. It can be like a drug. It can just be your brain playing tricks on you. Like, God sent me a sign by, like, the shadow on the ground said the letter S. And I realized, oh my God, like, I haven't studied for my finals yet. And the S stands for study. And so that's when I realized I have to go study. It's like, no, you attributed the letter on the ground that you perceived as an S to the fact that you haven't studied yet. It triggered a neuronal connection in your brain. Okay, that's not God sending you a sign. It's simply not, you know? So I don't buy the personal experience thing. But where I was going with that is, like, it doesn't have to be a mental illness. Sorry, I feel like I've been losing track a lot lately of, like, where my brain came from and where it's going. So it doesn't even have to be mental illness. It can be a drug. It can be just your brain playing a trick on you, or, like, just an association that your brain made.
So the moral argument I'd put in B tier. I think the moral argument is a pretty good argument. I think most atheist philosophers would agree that morality is not objective if God does not exist. And even if atheists may claim that morality is subjective, almost nobody really believes it. Almost everyone has this sense and lives as if...
Hold on, I'm going to grab my hand warmers. I got my gray ones. I'm thinking about making these to put on the store. Would you guys like that? Inscribe my symbol on them? I think that'd be pretty sick. All right, let's keep going.
Morality is objective. Now, just because belief in God can epistemologically justify objective morality, that doesn't mean religious people will always agree on what's moral. The atheist could say that Christians have disagreed on slavery, which they absolutely have. Christians have disagreed on many moral issues. Religious people of all kinds have disagreed on moral issues.
True.
But if you believe in God, you at least have a foundation to say morals are objective, and therefore we can impose morals on other people. The moral argument is based...
See that, but you literally just said it. Like, I'm imposing my moral compass upon you, because, I don't see where this is supposed to be convincing yet. You know what I mean? All you're saying is I'm right and you're wrong, and I know that because I believe in God. Like, that's all this is.
Because people on Earth disagree what's right and wrong is, then can something be objective? Also,
real quick, since I brought it up, please go to my, I know it says it at the beginning of every video, but go to my site, or my shop, etsy.com/shop/GunterGrabs. You can find the link in the description. We've got stress balls that you can buy. We've got keychains. We've got little, here, let me go full screen real quick. We got, what are they called? What are they called again, chat? Coasters. We got coasters you can buy. Etsy.com/shop/Alec Gunter. They got my logo on them. They're very cool. Keychains, stress balls, coasters, and then also stickers. You can get stickers. Buy today while they're in stock. They're selling like hotcakes. No, I actually haven't sold much yet. But please go to my shop. All right.
Right or wrong. The only way it can be objectively
put your drink
right or wrong is if there is supreme authority, which is what we would call God. Like, in a culture, like, let's say 90% of a culture believes it is good and right to horribly persecute the 10%. You would have the majority agreeing on a certain moral value. Would that make it right? Most people instinctively would say no. So I think the moral argument is a pretty good argument for God. Now, the atheist could say that, yes, even if we feel like morality is objective, that doesn't mean it's true. Like, one of the fallacies, or maybe it's one of the cognitive biases, is like a just world hypothesis. Just because like we feel it ought to be true doesn't mean it is true, and they have a good point there. Next is from consciousness. Now, I went over in my video about the arguments for God.
Oh, so this is going to say like, okay, our consciousness itself proves God's existence. That's not true either. Just because something exists does not mean that it came from God. And just because we can't understand it, like we don't understand consciousness yet, not fully. One day we will, hopefully. And if we ever are able to understand it, then maybe we can even recreate it from scratch, you know? Perhaps. Who's to say? I don't know why you would do that, but you could. But right now, we don't understand it, and that's fine. But attributing that to God just limits it just limits scientific progress on understanding it. You know what I mean? So I just don't like it. And it's not convincing.
Consciousness and the experience of being, just aware is irreducible. You cannot study it scientifically.
Yeah, I think therefore God.
It is God of the gaps when you try to use God or the supernatural. I don't think this is really an argument for God. I think it's more an argument for the human soul. It is God of the gaps if you try to use something supernatural to fill in the gaps of what science hasn't discovered yet.
He's not wrong.
But consciousness is something that science, by definition, cannot answer.
I disagree. What do you mean by definition cannot answer? It hasn't answered it yet. There's a lot of things that science in history has not been able to explain, like disease, why, like evolution was something that we couldn't explain. There's no reason that we can't eventually explain consciousness, though. There's no reason to believe that. You're just saying that because we don't understand it yet, and so this isn't a statement that you can prove or disprove at this point in time. It's lazy thinking. It's contrived bullshit. It's contrived bullshit. You just made that up.
It's not just that science does not yet have an answer to human consciousness.
Yes,
it's that science cannot answer the question of human consciousness. Yes, science can study the brain, and science can study the brain chemicals, that brain chemicals correlate to feeling certain things or experiencing certain things, but those chemicals are not the same as the experience of that thing itself. Here's why science cannot analyze consciousness.
Okay.
You can only observe your own consciousness. You cannot observe anyone else's consciousness. For all you know,
not yet.
You could be a solipsist. For all you know, you might be the only person who exists because you cannot observe anyone else's consciousness. And science depends on observation.
Or I guess you can't observe anyone else's consciousness. I guess not. But we can derive that other people are conscious, though. And I don't think that's an explanation. Like, just because I can't experience what somebody else is experiencing doesn't mean, like, the nature of consciousness itself is not an argument in favor of God. Like, that doesn't mean that God exists. That's all there is to it. For all you know, Zoomer, you're a shrimp. He's a shrimp in a fish tank being experimented on by people who decided to give him virtual reality goggles, right? And that's and they also gave him super intelligence for a shrimp, and so that's why he's able to articulate all these thoughts. We all just live in a virtual reality experiment. I can observe that Alec is conscious and self-aware by asking him. Yeah, but you could do the same thing with chatbot AI or whatever it is. So that's really not I can't literally know that you're conscious. I can't know that. Okay. But I can derive that probability from my surroundings and not Pascal's wager. It's Occam's razor. Occam's razor. The most likely explanation is the simplest one, and the simplest one is that yes, you're conscious because you act sort of like how I do, and in various capacities, like being able to choose what actions you take next. You have some similar features to me, and so the simplest explanation is yes, you're conscious.
The scientific method depends on being able to observe things. So science cannot say anything about that which we cannot observe. And that is why science cannot answer the question of consciousness. So
that's not true.
You could just say it's a mystery, but the only way...
In fact, we actually just got new research on... why noble gases affect the brain. Noble gases and neuroprotection from bench to bedside. Inert gases such as helium, argon, and xenon have gained considerable attention for their medical value. Noble gases present an intriguing scientific paradox. Although extremely chemically inert, they display a remarkable spectrum of clinically useful biological properties. Despite a relative paucity of knowledge about their mechanisms of action, some noble gases have been used successfully in clinical practice. The neuroprotection elicited by these noble gases has been investigated in experimental animal models of various types of brain injuries, such as traumatic brain injury, stroke, subarachnoid hemorrhage, cerebral ischemic / perfusion injury, and neurodegenerative disease. Collectively, these central nervous system injuries are a leading cause of morbidity and mortality every year worldwide. So even though we don't understand it completely, we know that these supposedly inert and unreactive gases affect our consciousness, you know? And so if you ascribe to the idea of a soul, right, and like an underlying constant to your behavior, then why do things like noble gases work? Why is it that when you get brain injury, you completely change your personality? Like, none of that makes any sense. There is a physical component to consciousness, something that is there that we can eventually measure and observe. We just haven't done it yet, but we're getting closer.
Way to answer the question of consciousness is with some sort of supernatural metaphysical system that goes beyond what science itself can say. All right, now in A tier, we have the transcendental argument.
Okay.
This is articulated pretty well by people like Jay Dyer, some of those Orthodox people, Eastern Orthodox. It's presuppositionalism, which is common in some parts of the Reformed tradition, is pretty similar to this. It basically says when people just...
By the way, I want to clarify, the new research is not that noble gases affect the brain. I think that I couldn't find the exact article, but it's research that basically says stuff like they're starting to figure out why the inert gases affect the brain. Like it's something to do with, I don't even remember. It's so complicated, but it's something to do with, it's very chemical, scientific stuff. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, please feel free to link it.
Think logically, there are a lot of assumptions they take for granted that they can't prove. Like, people assume that there is uniformity in nature. People assume that truth exists. There's a lot of assumptions that people make that they can't prove. You can't prove that truth exists. That's impossible. So...
But truth meaning what? Because that can mean a number of things. What I know, the only thing that I know for certain that is true is that I am experiencing things, right? I think, therefore I am. That's the only thing I know for sure. That is my objective truth, is that I experience things. It could all be fake, it could all be made up, whatever, but I experience things. He's starting to assume. But as far as like whether or not there's like an objective truth, I don't know what you mean by that. Yeah, it exists in context, exactly. Like the truth of the sky being blue, right? Well, that's true if the sky's actually blue. Like if it's currently, you look up and the color... whatever the electromagnetic spectrum, I think, right? What is it called? The light spectrum is, my brain can't do scientific terminology right now. You guys get my point. But maybe the sky's not actually blue. Maybe it's actually some other color right now, and I'm just experiencing, like we're collectively experiencing it as blue. But does that make it not true? If everybody experiences it as blue? Like, I don't know. Like, there's no answer to whether or not there's, like, an objectively blue sky in that sense. But in context, we call it blue. Everyone experiences it as blue. Therefore, we call it blue. A standard reaction of interactions to the atmosphere. What you see is what you see, yeah. I find all this of Christianity so frustrating because it's inherently hostile and coercive. Yeah, like, I wouldn't care as much if they want to, like, sit down and discuss this stuff if it wasn't for the fact that they say that, like, oh, it's objective truth that, like, you're either biological male or biological female, and you can't change that, and all these trans woke nonsense, and you shouldn't be gay because you can't reproduce. Like, that's, like, get rid of all of that, and then my problems with religion pretty much dissipate, you know? I do think, though, there is an inherent problem. There is one inherent problem, and that's that religion opens up the pathway to just believing things on principle or, like, out of faith, and I don't like that very much. You should be able to critically analyze the things that you believe and have evidence for them. That's what I think.
These unproven assumptions make a lot more sense in a worldview where God exists and all of reality is upheld by the mind of God than in a worldview where God does not exist, and these assumptions are just human assertions that they're assuming without evidence. So that's basically a transcendental argument. My version of the transcendental argument is using the three transcendentals: goodness, truth, and beauty. Truth is really the only one you could make an actual argument for. Goodness and beauty are just things that, I think are important to think about. The three.
But then why mention them? Goodness and beauty are both very subjective, and actually so is truth to a certain extent, just like we talked about. It may be a schizophrenic person's truth that they saw a man in armor in the hallway, and I can't say that that person did not see that. Like that's their subjective truth. Because subjectively, I did not see it, right? And subjectively, most people did not see it. The vast majority, everybody except that person saw it. But their truth is they saw a man in armor in the hallway. That's their truth. And they're not lying. They did see that. You know what I mean? It's just that it's not like tangibly there for the rest of us. So in that sense, I think that truth can be subjective.
Three transcendentals: goodness, truth, and beauty. Jordan Cooper, very great Lutheran theologian, talks about this a lot. Goodness, truth, and beauty are all objective because they're all rooted in God's nature. What? That which is good is that which conforms to God's nature. That which is beautiful.
Some people think that like rainstorms are beautiful, and other people think that they're ugly as sin. Some people think that I'm beautiful, and some people think I'm ugly as sin. And and that's the one objective lie that people tell sometimes, is that I'm ugly. But in all seriousness, like truth and all three are subjective. All three are subjective, and I can make very strong arguments that they are.
Is that which conforms to God's nature. That which is true is that which conforms to God's nature. But goodness, truth, and beauty can only be objective if God exists, but everyone instinctively knows that goodness, truth, and beauty are objective. And especially
no, that's not true.
Because if truth is not objective, then the statement, truth is not objective, is that statement objectively true? If yes, objective truth exists. If it's not true, then objective truth exists. So I think you can argue just like...
What? Did he just word salad me?
Truth is not objective. Is that statement objectively true? If yes, objective truth exists. If it's not true, then objective truth...
Oh, come on. That's such a lazy way of putting it, man. Like, yes, okay, technically you could say objectively truth is subjective, okay? And that would be like an objective truth. But is it? Because some things are just objectively true. Like, the word, like, this is just a word game that we're playing. It's a word game we're playing. It all goes back to a word game. Because what we consider objective is subjective, if you guys really think about it. Okay? Because once again, like, think about like a color that like, think about people who are colorblind. Well, let's say that everybody on Earth was colorblind, right? Except for one person. And this one person can see colors that other people can't see. But there's really not a whole lot that they can do with that information because nobody else can see those colors. But everybody on Earth thinks that objectively, the color range is like red, blue. Like you can see the colors red, blue, and green. You can't see any other colors. Orange, yellow, black. Well, you guys got my point, right? So would the objective truth then be that those colors don't exist? But one person can still see them. You guys got my point? Like we could have this philosophical argument back and forth. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to a word game that he's playing. We have science to how much humans can see data. We can do tests on that person's vision. Okay, yes, fine. You can do tests on that person's vision. I don't know. Maybe that's not the best example. Intersubjective is a good word. It's objective to the extent that we can agree on it, but we do have to agree on it. Yeah, it's really complicated. I don't know if I have the brain power for it. I was going to say I don't know if I have the brain power for it now, but honestly, I don't know if I have it at all. We know cats can see a higher energy spectrum. Yeah. So there are colors that we can't see that exist. At least in the sense he's putting it in, it's not objective. I don't feel like I'm making the best case, but truth doesn't have to be objective, is my point. I have a big but smooth brain. Yes, exactly. Like, truth can be subjective. It just depends on how you're using the two words. They're words that we made up.
Truth exists. So I think you can argue just logically that objective truth exists.
Also, I want to put out there for the record, I don't think this is a very useful conversation. I think the most useful conversations we can be having are, what things can we observe to be true? What things help us? And what things hurt us? Things like that. You know, what objectively makes the world better, if it, so to speak, you know? And when I say objectively make the world better, what I mean is it broadens our understanding, it increases our freedom, you know, things like that. That's what I would consider to be like objective truth. Yeah, you can't just argue or assume that objective truth exists. I agree.
But I think because truth is one of those transcendentals, it cannot exist unless God exists. And I know you could pick that apart. There's criticisms of the transcendental argument. It's one of my personal favorites because I really do think that there are a lot of assumptions we take for granted. I really think that theology is the basis for science. That's why I prefer the transcendental argument to the cosmological argument. I don't think science leads us to God. I think God leads us to science because it really was the church that formed the basis for modern science. Yes, there was a...
I don't think that's true at all, is it? What? That's not true at all. The church formed the basis for modern science source? Even I believe science and religion are two different realms. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. They're just completely different. Yeah, it's scientific method shit. Like, you cannot use the scientific method to prove or disprove God. Therefore, God is not scientific. So God can't lead you to science. That's impossible.
Ancient Greek science, there was Islamic science. The modern science, as we know it today, was started by people who believed that the world was designed by an intelligent God.
Yeah, but that wasn't necessary. Even if they did believe that the world was designed by an intelligent God, they can still believe that while doing like research on things that they can prove and disprove, you know, that they can support and refute. But you don't have to have God in that equation. You don't have to. He's just like an extra addendum.
And that motivated them to study the world. Now, that doesn't, just because they believe that, doesn't mean God is real. It is possible that the church could have started science and then science ends up undermining what the church believes. That's what Alex O'Connor said in response to me. That is a possibility. I'm just saying I like the transcendental argument because I think these assumptions about God, I think
what they found proves it wrong.
Precedes all the other sciences. Theology was called the queen of the sciences in the Middle Ages. So, yeah, I like that one. I also really like the ontological argument. Now, I don't use the ontological argument when I'm trying to talk to one of my unbelieving friends. If I talk to one of my unbelieving friends, I use the evidential argument and the moral argument. Because the ontological argument is very difficult to understand. It was articulated by Saint Anselm of Canterbury. And I think Anselm is one of the greatest theologians ever. I think he's my fourth favorite theologian behind Athanasius, Augustine, and John Calvin. St. Anselm was so based, he thought of so many cool things, and he founded medieval scholasticism.
I can't stand when people like him use the word based. It just undermines the word.
He disagreed with Thomas Aquinas, or rather Thomas Aquinas disagreed with him, because Aquinas was much later. Aquinas didn't like the ontological argument, but I favor Anselm over Aquinas.
Exactly, Plague Mercury.
So the ontological argument basically says, God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived.
Okay, yeah. So God, basically he's saying God is the top of, like, you could put this a lot more simply. So, like, God is infinity. God is infinite. Like, that's what it is. Because the only thing that nothing great can be conceived greater than is infinity. Because you can think of numbers down and down and down and down the line, right? Like 100 septillion, whatever. But then what's greater than 100 septillion? 100 septillion and 1. So all he's saying is that God is infinite.
If you think you can conceive of something greater than God, then that thing is God. Gavin Ortland has a great video on the ontological argument, which I highly recommend. Gavin Ortland from Truth Unites, another great YouTube pastor that I would...
You know what's greater than God? Cheese sticks. Motherfucking mozzarella cheese sticks. Crispy. You dip them in some marinara sauce. That shit's delicious, okay? That's greater than God. So, mozzarella cheese sticks, you are now God. I accept this.
Highly recommend to everyone. So the ontological argument says God is defined as that than which nothing greater can be conceived.
I think that's scientifically
sound. It's the greatest
sound.
possible being, but I think that than which nothing greater can be conceived is a better way to put it. And that means God is all-powerful, because a being who is all-powerful is greater than a being who is not all-powerful. It means God is all-good, because a being who is all-good is greater than a being who is not all-good. And it means that God exists, because a being that exists is greater than a being that doesn't exist. And you could say, just because we can think of such a being doesn't mean it actually exists. Well, actually, it does. because a being that exists in reality is greater than a being that exists in our mind. So there is such a thing as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Now you
That was a lot of word salad. I don't think that any of what he just said makes sense. Just because there is, just because the concept of infinity basically has to exist in some capacity does not mean that God exists. And even if God does exist, it's not necessarily the Christian God, okay? Like, if there is some kind of divine, conscious, purposeful creator, that doesn't mean it's the Christian God. And I know that he addressed this earlier in Pascal's Wager, but he really didn't. He needs to address it here, too. It makes sense, kind of, but it's fallacious for sure. If I can imagine the flying spaghetti monster existing, it must exist. Yeah, I don't know, like, and also, like, a being that is good is greater than a being that's not good. Being good is very subjective. It can be, at least. Like, is it, like, this would be like the, like, take the trolley problem, for instance. That has a lot of people mixed up on what the good outcome, like the better outcome, I should say, is. Obviously, the good outcome is nobody in the trolley problem dies. But if you have one person tied down to a track and the train is headed if you have 5 people tied down to a track and the train is headed toward them, is it good to change the track so that it goes to where only one person is tied down to the track? So therefore, fewer people die. We don't know. There's no way of ascertaining this with the information given to us. Like, typically, fewer people dying is good. But then also you're influencing that decision. For one thing, that's an argument that a lot of people make. For another thing, we don't know the identities of the person. What if it's 5 children, like, or 1 child versus 5 adults? Like, there's all kinds of questions you can ask that basically force you to subjectively come to your own version of the most moral outcome in this scenario. So goodness is not objective. And if goodness is not objective, then you can't say that, being more good than something else makes you, like, better. You know what I mean? There's no objective way of determining that. It is trying to define God into existence, but that's not how reality works. All things being equal, it just comes down to the model of ethics you use. Yeah, and models of ethics don't always agree with each other. What if all the passengers are clones of baby Hitler? So they're all Vosh, is what you're saying? That's a good point.
You could say another response is, okay, what if I use this to argue for the existence of a perfect turtle or a self-existent pizza? What if I say, like,
true,
my perfect pizza is a pizza which no greater pizza can be conceived? Well, the problem with that is that the definition of pizza implies limitations. I made a funny line in my video about the arguments for God that people seem to think was funny. If your pizza gets infinitely great, it'll turn into God. But if God is infinitely good and powerful, then how can imperfection possibly stem from that? A perfect being cannot create imperfection, and yet here we are, imperfect on multiple levels. Okay, fallible, non-infinite, incapable of understanding what seem to be basic concepts of reality, like consciousness. Like, we're very imperfect. How the hell did God create us if he himself is perfect? And why? Okay? Why would a perfect being create imperfection, is my question. He can't be all good. He can't. Pizza has infinite size, infinite power,
Thank you,
and is
Mercury.
Eternal. A pizza of infinite size and infinite eternity and infinite power, that's not a pizza. That's God. Okay? Same with the turtle. The definition of everything except God implies limitations. And there's been many, many different articulations of the ontological argument. There's Gödel's ontological argument with, like, mathematical proofs and stuff. I kind of understand it. I am a math student. That's mainly what I study.
So if you can say that an infinitely large and delicious pizza is God, right? Infinitely large and delicious and whatever, and infinitely powerful is God, then why can you not just say that? Like, again, we run into the problem of, why does your Christian God exist then? This doesn't answer that. So this is not an argument in favor of Christianity. This is just an argument in favor of an infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing entity of some sort.
One day I hope to understand what he's trying to say. He uses, like, proofs logic about how certain things can be, like, vacuously true. I don't understand it enough to know if I like it or not. But generally speaking, the ontological argument is taken most seriously by mainstream philosophers of all the arguments for God. It's not that they necessarily believe in it, it's just the most well-respected, I believe. But now, in S tier, my favorite argument for God is the argument from mathematics.
Let's go! Mathematically proving God, baby.
I did admit that my video about responding to atheist arguments was a bad one. But I did make a different video about how math proves God, and a lot of atheists said that was bad. No, I stand by that one. There are things in mathematics that prove God beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt.
That's not true. I'm sorry.
Now, even if we didn't have things like the Mandelbrot set or Euler's identity, I think the fact that math contains infinite information proves the existence of an infinite mind to contain that infinite information. Like, there's an infinite number of numbers.
It doesn't. What? Just because something exists doesn't mean that somebody, like, can ascertain it and understand it, you know? Like, there are things that exist that are beyond comprehension to us. And that's just, like, so there are things that we may never learn that exist nonetheless. And we just have to, you know, be fine with that. But those things existing doesn't mean necessarily that a consciousness must exist which understands them. Sometimes things just exist. Sometimes, you know, it's fine that things just exist. And yeah, we invented numbers. Good point. Our understanding of math is our understanding. God did not make math. We did. Humans. Really, really, the least of a proof is his God tier. Dividing by 0 is proof of God. True. What is God? Any number over 0.
Is all that information stored? And you could say those numbers aren't actually all real. Those numbers are just things that we made up to explain the world.
That's true.
So there aren't actually an infinite number of numbers. There are only as many numbers as we can think of. But the thing that puts the nail in the coffin of that idea is the Mandelbrot set. The Mandelbrot set was clearly discovered by us. It was not invented by us. The debate in mathematics is whether math is invented or discovered. If it's invented, then that's not an argument for God, because math is just something we made. But if it's discovered, then who made math? And since math is infinite, then if it was created, it had to be created by an infinite being, if math is infinite, which math is.
Math was not created. Math is our understanding of how numbers work. Okay, we made math. Yeah, it's pattern discovery. It's just a complex way which helps us understand the universe. That's all math is. Okay, and it can be very complex, and it can go on for infinity. But we still created it. We created the concept of infinity. That is a human creation. Okay, the only reason we're even having this discussion right now is because humans like invented that concept. You know. So I just find this argument silly. Like, there's no mathematical proof of God. And if there were, then, like, all the mathematicians and scientists in the world would agree that God exists. And they don't. So there's not.
Is infinite. So the Mandelbrot set,
at least not
it's
yet,
the shape with infinite complexity. It's not just one of those regular fractals.
They agree that infinity exists in some capacity.
The Mandelbrot set basically generates new complexity the more you zoom in on it. And you can zoom in forever and ever and ever, and you will never stop finding new things. Anytime you zoom in on the Mandelbrot set enough, you could see a shape that no human has ever seen before, and this shape is all generated by one simple equation. I don't like answers in Genesis.
Okay, but you know what humans have seen before? Lines, faces, you know, like shape faces, and which are also concepts invented by humans. Okay, so just because there's a shape that nobody has ever seen before, now somebody's seen it. You know, and even if we can like randomly generate an infinite number of things, that doesn't mean there's like some kind of divine creator doing that. That doesn't prove a divine creator. I just don't understand this argument at all. This is equivalent to saying pi has infinitely many digits and they never repeat, therefore God made pi. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's no... And also, like, if God did make pi, right? Like, if God was, like, tinkering around in his God lab and he's like, how do I make a circle? You know? How do I make a perfect circle? Like SpongeBob sitting down, drawing the head and then erasing it to make the perfect circle, right? His version of that is, what if I have this extraordinarily complex pi variable that nobody that I create with a finite capacity for understanding, mind you, will be able to like completely write out, you know? Perfect. Let's set it into place. It's like if God were perfect, I would expect the constant to be a lot more comprehensible. You know what I mean? Like pi. That I would expect that to be a lot more comprehensible. You're just sneaking in the assumption that someone decided the value of pi. It's circular. Pi is about 3, but we say 10 just to be safe. True. Pi is about 10.
Young Earth creationists, but they do have a good video about how this really displays the infinite mind of God. Broken clock is right twice a day. So, yeah, the mathematical argument of creationists, but they do have a good video about how this really displays the infinite mind of God. Broken clock is right twice a day. So, yeah, the mathematical argument is great. There's also Euler's identity. Euler's identity, it was discovered by Leonard Euler, one of the greatest mathematicians ever, and he was a devout Calvinist like me. And he saw this as proof that God exists once he discovered it. There's like the 5 most important...
Yeah, but you're starting from the assumption that God is already real and then finding proof for it. You're not starting from the question of, is God real? You know what I mean? You can't. Like, if you already believe in God, you can't start from that assumption. Like, you're finding ways to justify what you already have preconceived notions about. You're finding solutions for a problem that you made up.
Important numbers in mathematics are 0, 1, e, I, and pi. For those of you who are not
I don't know what
educated in
Calvinist
math,
entails.
E is a number that explains exponential functions because e to the x is the only equation that is its own derivative, the only non-trivial equation that is.
I'm sorry, this is such nerd shit.
I is the basis for all the imaginary numbers. Imaginary numbers...
Call me stupid, but this is too much nerd shit for me.
Numbers aren't fake numbers. They're only called imaginary because they don't correspond to real things. Because you can say, I have 3 apples.
Calvinism, limited atonement means that Christ's sacrifice was exclusively for the elect and only efficient for their salvation. What? Do they believe in predestination? My stepfam does this, basically ascribing the wonder they find in the world to be definitive proof of their idea of God. Yeah, it's just a very basic way of saying the world has stuff in it, therefore God. Basically, God chooses who they want to save. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's really stupid.
Apples, you can't say I have 3 apples. And of course, most people know what pi is. Pi is the number that explains both the area and a circumference of the circle. So,
imaginary numbers do correspond to something they're used in surveying. I don't know much about imaginary numbers. I just know that they're a thing, and it's a little bit beyond my comprehension.
There's pi, there's e, there's I. 1 is obviously one of the most important numbers because it's the basis for all.
Yeah, but those don't prove
numbers.
God. If anything,
and
they disprove
0
him.
Is actually a very important
They're evidence
number
against
because
him.
It wasn't until the I think it was either the Islamic or the...
If God exists, here's my final destination argument. If God exists, we should all know about it. There should be not a shred of doubt. You know why? Because if God is infinite, all-knowing, all-powerful, and wants us to believe in him, he would make damn well sure that we do. He would make it beyond question. Okay? He would prove it. Because God, unlike science, would be able to prove just about anything. Science can't prove it, but God sure as fuck can. He's all-powerful. And the fact that I do not believe in God is proof in and of itself that God does not exist, because otherwise he would make me believe in him. Or he would have created me so that I believe in him. Because clearly that's what he wants, right? He wants me to believe in him and show him worship and praise. Why did he not just make a bunch of little puppets then? And then you get into like, oh, well, he wanted freedom of choice. I'm still predetermined by certain variables in my life to make certain choices. Not predetermined per se, but like primed. Let's say primed, okay? To make certain choices based on things that have happened to me, things that are happening now, my environment, etc. So you can influence people's decision making, is my point. And if you can influence people's decision making and he wants people to know that he exists and worship him, he would have done that. He's all powerful. If there are factors outside of his control, he's not all powerful. And if freedom of choice is a factor outside of his control, then he's not a power. Like, this doesn't make any sense. It's all incoherent, nonsense, gibberish, bullshit. I don't care about your mathematical proofs. I don't. Okay? At the end of the day, all of this is a fucking excuse to hate gay and trans people. Right? Like, let's be real. At the end of the day, all of this is an excuse to have power over people. That's all it is. That's all any of this is. And if you think that it's anything else, I would love to hear your opinion on it. Honestly, like, come on to my show. Let's hear it. But this shit right here is just a power grab. You're trying to make excuses for the fact that you want to control other people's lives.
Indian mathematicians that discovered zero, that we were able to do algebra because zero acts as a placeholder. So those 5 numbers, 0, I, E, 1, and pi.
But please continue.
The order I said them in. All of them are connected by a beautiful equation. E to the power of pi times I plus 1 equals 0. And it is such a coincidence that they work together that way. And yes,
no! We made up the numbers! What do you mean that's a coincidence they work together this way? We made up the numbers! We made them up. It doesn't have to work out like that. Okay? It just makes the most sense that they do. That doesn't prove God. What? That doesn't prove God. No. That's not how that works. That's not how math works. Does S stand for schizo tier? It's a good one.
Once you understand the math behind it, once you understand complex numbers, complex analysis, you can see why it works. It's not like a complete coincidence. But
exactly,
the fact that it does work like that, the fact that math all fits together, and the more you study math, the more
we
you see
made
that
it
all
fit
fits together. That, I think, is indisputable proof of God. And I prefer to argue from math for God than to argue from science.
Yeah, we also derived the equation that proves that relationship. Exactly. Thank you, Saki Tanuki.
Some people say math is a science. No, math is not a science. Science relies on evidence, observations, and experiments.
He's just people talking.
Math relies on logical proof. I am a Platonist, a mathematical Platonist. I believe that mathematical truths are more real than physical truths. Because physical truths, every scientific experiment and observation is an approximation. It's never exact. But mathematics is exact. And I think we should argue for God based on mathematics and logic rather than trying to appeal to physical things. So that's my opinion, and that's my response to the crappy atheist video that I made that got lots of responses. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all later.
Cool. Yeah, that didn't convince me at all. Sorry. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more, hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload. If you enjoy my content, you enjoy what I do, I really appreciate any financial help that I can get. Go to youtube.com/AlecGunterTTV/join. You got some awesome benefits, such as seeing early videos, awesome emotes that you can use in the comments of YouTube videos, and a sweet badge next to your name. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'd really appreciate if you join. It is cheaper than the cost of a blowjob from your mom. So with all that being said, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.